Welcome to The Real Recipe, the podcast that brings you the perfect blend of real estate trends and topics, where we serve up fresh insights and sizzling strategies. So let's get cooking.
Welcome back to The Real Recipe. Ryan's back.
Let's
He's
do
got
it.
he's got a mug and he's got a sweatshirt today.
Yeah.
It's 90 degrees outside.
This is what all the young kids do anyway. They walk around with like
With their hoods
the
up.
knee-high socks with their slides
Yeah.
and their hoodies, and it's 98 degrees outside.
To be young again.
I'm just trying to live my best life.
I know. No one's knocking you. Before we get started talking about our topic today, which is buying real estate with debt, Ryan has a story to share because before we started, he started telling me how he was in the military.
This is going to be.
So now I want to hear about it.
The problem with this is we're not going to be able. You have to pick one. You have to pick one because you can't.
It's that long of a
It's
story?
not that long of a story. I mean, I could condense it down probably in a couple minutes, but
Did you get kicked out of boot camp or did you make it all the way through?
I got kicked out.
Okay, so. Oh man!
See, now you're
I
like,
so
oh,
desperately
yeah.
want to hear it.
All right, okay. So I'll just make it a quick two-second thing. Or
Yeah.
a quick condensed.
You got a
version.
minute.
I
Go.
know I can do better than that. But, so when I turned 17 and got my car, I got I had a brand new Mazda RX-7, which I thought it was so badass at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the course of 6 months, I accumulated 19 points on my license.
Oh my God, Ryan!
I know. But this car is
You
awesome.
loan people money?
Well, that's one has to do with nothing to do with the other, right? Which is so funny, right? So anyway, so I lost my license a couple times throughout this process, obviously. So so long and short of it is, the backstory is I opted not to go to college, and I was like, you know what? Let me find myself. Let me go into the military. So I go in, take their test, do their whole thing. And every job that I qualify for, so I scored 95 on their test,
Right.
which for them is like, they're going to roll out the red carpet for me.
Yeah.
Because everybody scores like a 70, barely passes their test, right? So every job that I qualify for has these ridiculously long enlistments. Mm-hmm. And looking back at it now, some of the jobs were pretty cool had I done them based on what has transpired over the last 20, 30 years. But anyway, so I did not want to be in the military for 20 years, right? Because some of these enlistments were that long. So I was like, oh, this is cool. Let me do military police. Like, it's 4 years. Figure out where I could get stationed wherever. I'm not going to be on the front line anywhere. I could get the GI Bill. I could go wherever I want. Go see the world. Okay. So in order to get, I get processed, go through the onboarding. They send me to Fort McClellan, Alabama,
Okay.
which is in the middle of nowhere in Alabama.
You don't say.
Yeah, right. It's a 4 hour. So you fly into Atlanta. It is a 4 hour drive west
Oh my God.
in the middle of nowhere in Alabama. I get on the base, and you go into this holding area for a couple days, right? So 3-floor building, and they start you with the whole process of onboarding. You fill out all your paperwork, you get all your fatigues, you get all your stuff, right? So you're usually there for 3 days. So the end of the second day, they tell me, hey, you have to go see the lieutenant colonel on the base. I'm like, okay, why? What did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. So I go to the meeting with her, and she sits down and she's like, listen, she's like, you've signed up to be, an MP. And the majority of your time is going to be spent in a car. She's like, you have 19 points in your license.
Oh my God.
She goes, you cannot be MP. Well, I'm out of here. I'm not going to do anything
Did you
else.
have to fly out there just to be told that?
Right.
Like they could have maybe given
Thank
you
you.
a letter or
But
something?
this shows you all the flaws within the military and their recruiting process.
Mm-hmm.
And I still, to this day, will go down believing that it had nothing to do with my driving record. It had absolutely everything to do with the fact that I scored so high that they wanted to push me into other jobs. Because the next week was a full-on hardcore press from the recruiters on base, from people on the base telling me to go do these other jobs. Like full court press, sales, everything. you got to meet with this guy, you got to go meet with this guy, you got to go meet with this guy, and it was like a ridiculous thing for the next few days. But what wound up happening, what was hysterical, was they wound up putting me on the 3rd floor of this barracks, right? So the 1st floor was all the offices and some of the facilities. 2nd floor was the sleeping quarters for all the new recruits coming onto the base, and then the third floor was all the rejects.
I was gonna say all the people who lost their license and
So I'm
they
here.
couldn't place somewhere.
I'm here 3 days, right? I'm here 3 days. It takes me another 3 weeks to get off the base, so it's not like I just immediately leave. It is I gotta go like another week doing all this, whatever this tour is with all these different people, and then they process me off the base. But I'm on the 3rd floor. People with 6 toes, guys got a hole in his heart. People with like medical conditions, which kind of goes back to my point of all these people slip through the cracks.
Right.
I highly doubt it had anything to do with my driving record.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I was in the military for 28 days, and I decided that it was not for me.
Well,
Although I had it originally intended it to be, but.
Where would we be now? Well, we're glad that you're here instead.
Let's see.
Yeah.
I know.
Yes, things happen for
My
a reason.
life would have had a vastly different
Yes, it would.
trajectory had I stayed and done that. And some of the stuff that I had qualified for was some really high level stuff.
You got all the clearances?
Yeah, I would have.
Yeah.
I would have. But that's why you had to have this,
Right.
18-year enlistment, 22-year enlistment, because all that stuff that I qualified for, they're training you to do all these special ops stuff and, like stuff in Fort Bragg and Fort Hood and, some of the other
Right.
bases around the country. It was just like, there's no way I'm signing up for 18 years of my life. That's crazy. But hey, whatever.
And it probably went by like that, so
Probably would
you
have.
don't even
Yeah.
think about it.
Probably-
Well, Black
probably.
Ops Ryan is here today
Yes.
Dressed and ready to
whole
go.
regalia, and I'm ready to go.
to talk
Yes.
about
Let's talk about debt.
real estate,
Let's talk
buying
about
real estate
borrowing
with
money.
debt. But you had sent over an interesting article, which is, I know we were talking about kind of what we were going to chat about next. And it's funny because you and I were just talking about this too. And we kept saying like, I wish, years ago I had gotten into investing earlier and maybe been better with with our money, or, been better and made investments early on. But I think for a lot of people, I mean, obviously buying real estate with debt, certainly even for savvy investors, is something that's done. But for people who are just getting started into it, or maybe they haven't been the most experienced investor, they're afraid to take on a loan because some mindsets, some ways of thinking will tell you to pay off all your debt.
Yeah.
Don't, buy investment properties cash. Don't use mortgage. Don't use any type of leverage.
Yeah.
Just buy it cash because you don't want to carry that burden. And sure, there's definitely positives to that.
Sure.
Obviously people the past few years, some landlords,
With
with COVID, couldn't pay their bills because they weren't collecting rent from people and they still had a mortgage to pay. So, hopefully they could carry that mortgage, and a lot of them could not. So that put them in a very bad situation.
Sure.
But buying real estate with debt can also be a positive thing too. So
it's a strategy that's old as time, right?
Right.
You just don't want to have yourself over leveraged when you're buying. But there's so many different ways to finance properties and not get yourself into a bad position. The single biggest complaint that you hear from people about having debt is, one of the scenarios you just pointed out, which, during COVID, people would buy investment properties and they would be maxed out. They would take out what is the minimum amount of money that I need to put down to buy this property.
yeah.
In some cases, you had people who did the whole FHA thing where you put down 3.5%, buy a 3-family and then, or 4-family, and then, drop down to a 3-family, 2-family, 1-family, et cetera, something like that. So you're buying a $400,000 house and you're putting 3.5% down. You got mortgage insurance, you got, you probably have a good interest rate, but you've leveraged the property.
Your loan to value is
it's ridiculous.
Really ridiculous.
And then, the minute you don't have a tenant paying,
You're in trouble.
you're underwater.
Yeah.
So that's a scenario where I think a lot of newer investors they don't hear about that piece of it.
Yeah.
Because you see a lot of these influencers online who will talk about, oh, go get an FHA loan. You could buy a 2-family, 3-family, 4-family. You put down 3.5%. And they don't talk about the fact that you're borrowing 96.5% of the property's value in terms of money. So the minute something goes wrong, you have a major expense in the property, or you have a tenant that doesn't want to pay. And some of these in some of these areas, the tenants they're not stupid. They know
they're
the
professional
rules.
tenants.
Yeah, right. They're professional tenants, and they know the rules. And if you exhibit any type of being green or new to investing, they'll jump on you real quick, and then you'll be stuck in a really precarious situation. So when you're investing, the one of the guiding principles is make sure that the leverage makes sense. Right now, when you're buying an investment property, it is customary for you to put down at least 25%. That's pretty much across the board. Doesn't matter what type of asset class it is. Doesn't matter where the property is. It's predominantly you're putting down 25%.
Right.
Now you can push it a little bit to 20% maybe, but generally when you do that, you're paying a substantially higher interest rate to do that. So it doesn't really make that much sense financially.
Not for the extra 5%.
Yeah, but if you're putting down 25%, and you're getting decent financing on the property, and the property cash flows at a decent multiple, it's not a bad thing to leverage the money and utilize somebody else's money to buy an investment property.
Right.
The one thing I would tell people is if you're going to borrow money to leverage a piece of property, make sure that you have money in reserve. Make sure you have a couple of months worth of mortgage payments in reserve, specifically for that mortgage, not for all your other mortgages, but specifically for that mortgage, so that that if something happens and a tenant isn't paying, you can get insurance. There's rent loss coverage. There's things that you can do for other means to get money coming in. But if you've set aside some reserves, you should be okay.
Now, isn't the lender going to want to see that too? Or
Yeah,
it just
in
depends?
most cases, the lenders want to see that you have reserves. But when they say they want to see reserves, they don't necessarily take into account that you own 8 properties,
Right.
and maybe you may own 6 of them cash, and you've got 2 of them or 3 of them leveraged with money, and you may not have enough cash on hand
Right.
to meet your obligations. They just care about your particular property. So that is a very convoluted side of it too. So
I think some people make the mistake too that they have, like, for example, like the Airbnb we have or whatever. On the months that makes really good money, I know some people who have a similar situation and they pull income from those properties, but then when they don't have a very booked year or a very booked season, they're scrambling to pull money out of other places to cover that mortgage, as opposed to just having it set aside in that bank account for that property or for that LLC and drawing from it.
it's one of those things where these are the topics that investors don't talk about when they buy real estate. It's one of those things that you figure it out kind of after you own the property, and you're like, oh crap, I got to actually pay this mortgage every month.
Right.
And this tenant isn't moving in until December, and I've got 4 months that I got to figure this out, and there's just some of those little nuances to investing that, people need to be better prepared for, or at least have a conversation with somebody about. Borrowing money to buy an investment property is, that is, old as time. That's how most people do it, because most people don't have the cash to do it. So getting a mortgage on an investment property is not the worst thing in the world. It just makes sure that you're adequately, you have adequate funds in reserve to backstop the mortgage, to make sure that if you ever get into a precarious situation that you're not jeopardizing yourself. If you own a property cash, it's not the worst thing in the world to take money out of it and have extra money on the sidelines waiting for other opportunities.
Right.
Because the last thing you want to do is you don't want to turn around and get and get into a situation where you miss opportunity
Something pops up
because you don't have the money ready to go.
Yeah.
And I tell this to my clients all the time, and it never fails. I get a phone call a couple times a year. Somebody will say, I should have listened to you.
Yeah.
I should have listened to you. I didn't do it. And I just had it actually happen. And we laughed about it afterwards because I told a client he owned a bunch of properties. And I told him, I said, listen, don't refinance all of them. Maybe take 2 or 3 of them and maybe take $1 million out and throw it in the bank. Oh, Ryan, why am I going to be paying interest on that stuff, right? Now, this is back when rates were decent,
Right.
4 or 5% on an investment property. We were laughing because he literally could have the money right now. Maybe, I think at the time we were looking at like 4.5 or 5%.
Okay.
He could literally have the money in the bank earning more than what his mortgage interest would be on the property.
Right.
So he would have a net like 1% gain on the money
he took out.
sitting in
Yeah.
the bank. And not to say that that's a great strategy, because it's not, but at least now he would have had $1 million sitting in the bank earning 5.5%. His mortgage would have been 4.5%.
Right.
He's making 1% on his money just sitting there.
And he has the ability to just pull it out, pull the trigger on something if a good investment comes
as soon
up.
as something comes up,
Yeah.
bang, he's
Yeah.
good to go. So now it gets a little bit different when rates are up 7%, 8%, 9%. That's when things are changing now a little bit. But even still, you take out $500,000. You're ready to go on an investment property. Why wouldn't you? And so I think one of the roles that I've played more recently is more of an advisory role to clients, especially newer investors. And when I say newer, I don't mean like literally brand spanking new, but people that are only doing it for a couple of years,
Right.
Maybe 5 or 10 years, and don't fully understand all the little nuances to it. Borrowing money isn't a bad thing if you do it correctly. Having a mortgage on your investment property isn't a bad thing if you do it correctly. In fact, a lot of the ways that we qualify borrowers nowadays, it virtually ensures that you're gonna have positive cash flow on
You're
your
talking
property.
about for the investment properties.
Yeah, for investment property. So even if you were to buy an investment property, like if I go to a local bank, you're buying an investment property, and I go to a local bank, I have to have at least 1.25% of your mortgage payment in terms of rental income on the property for you to qualify for that
Right.
mortgage, which means you're going to have cash flow. You'll have
Yeah.
positive cash flow on it. It may not be a lot, but
You're gonna have it.
You'll have positive cash flow on the property. Now, the question becomes your cash on cash return, meaning if I'm making $500 a month on it and I'm putting down $100,000, okay, you're making 6% on your money. Yeah, it's a little low, but you can justify the investment. A lot of investments nowadays, you're getting cash on cash returns, north of 10, 12%, 15%, 18%. Now you got a really good deal going on.
Yeah.
So it really is important to not shy away so much from investing or utilizing debt to purchase investment properties. It always cracks me up when I talk to investors who are like, oh, I don't want to owe anything. I don't want to owe any money to anybody. I want to have, these paid off. And
It's Italian
frankly,
people saying that.
it is. It's
Italian
a lot of
people
people saying that,
yeah.
but it's one of those things where you talk about it and you say to them, well, first of all, you're going to write it off tax-wise. You're going to write off the mortgage interest. So why wouldn't you do that? You're depreciating the property. So, okay, there you go. Any of the income that you're going to make, you're going to write off anyway. So you're not really
Right.
technically paying the full amount anyway. So why wouldn't you? And instead of you tying up $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 sitting in a property right now, you could throw it in the bank making 5.5%.
Yeah.
So if you got, if you had, I just closed one the other day for a guy, 6.75. All right, so there's a small spread there you're paying, 1.25 a year, but you got the money sitting in the bank,
Yeah.
ready to go when another property shows up.
It's funny. I
not
had
terrible.
a client who, maybe not so much now they're doing it, but they were.
Is it technology?
It's a technology issue I'm looking at.
He's not in technology. Oh,
But
okay.
he would always, when rates were good, at least the past 2 years, he had bought 2 properties, and as soon as he closed, he would take out a HELOC and put the money in the. Sometimes he would just leave it open; he wouldn't draw on it. But then the one instance, he took it out and he put it into an account that he was getting, I think, 4.5% interest on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, his rate was phenomenal on the HELOC, and his, even when he had a regular mortgage
It's
too.
not right now, I can
No,
tell you
I
that.
know. So he hasn't done that the last time he bought
Yeah.
a property this year, but
That's another thing
It's an
that I'm
interesting
getting a lot of
strategy.
calls on lately, because nobody wants to refinance the 2.5
Yeah.
or 3 or 4% mortgage that they have. They all want it, but they all want the equity because they've got
Yeah.
substantial equity now. Everybody's calling me for home equity lines and second mortgages and all this other stuff, and at least as it pertains to investment properties, it doesn't really. It sounds good, it looks good, but when you start to dig into all the little nooks and crannies and realize, like, hey, you have an investment property, like a prime rate on a home equity line right now is like 9%, between
Yeah.
8 and 10% right now on an equity line, depending on if you're in a private client group or if you have a special arrangement with your bank. But you're 8-10% somewhere in that range on your primary
Right,
residence.
right.
On an investment property, you're
way over that now.
You could be in the teens on an
I
investment.
mean, listen,
property.
if you really need the money and you have the ability to qualify and take it out, it's good that it's there, but obviously it's not.
Well, but here's the thing, though, right? Like, why would you go and do that, right? So you find you have a $250,000 equity line, and you find a deal,
Right.
okay, and your rate on your property is 10%. Okay, let me go write the check off my equity line. I'm okay paying 10%, but I'm not okay getting a mortgage
Right.
for 7%,
Right.
and potentially refinancing that in a couple of years if and when rates do come down. So I just think, like, the logic sometimes with consumers is just a little warped and twisted.
Yeah, I don't think people look at the big picture. We talked about that before
Yeah.
too, about people, being able to sell their house and pay off all their debt, even if it means that they buy another place and take a higher interest
I
rate.
know. It's crazy. The logic
Yeah.
sometimes, and you almost, I get off some of these calls sometimes, scratching my head, going, really? You think that that's a better way to go? Okay. I mean,
Yeah, it's a perception.
sometimes,
issue.
yeah. It's just a very weird way to do it. Listen, if you're doing something short term, you're going to do a short term project on a property, or you're going to flip something and you're going to be in and out of the money in 6 months. Right, I totally get that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But if you're buying something long term, there's no reason for you to be pulling money off of an equity line with a really high interest rate, and then not getting,
Yeah.
not getting financing on the other property just to pay cash for it. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I guess, but doesn't make sense. So, I mean, look, as long as you got good debt on your property, you're not over leveraged. I understand. If you don't have a ton of money and you want to start investing, I understand the reason why you would gravitate to try to do an FHA loan, maybe buy a multifamily, do an FHA loan. I understand why you would do that. Just be careful with that, because you're a first-time investor or you're a first-time buying a multifamily, you're leveraging almost the entire value of the property. You don't have it. There's a greater likelihood that you'll walk away from that than somebody who's put down 25%.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so for investors that I work with, we've talked about that. And then you've got the mortgage insurance thing, and you've got, other aspects of that it really just doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't work out. But, as long as you've got good, a good mortgage on your property, it's at a decent rate, it's palatable, this property's cash flow, it's not the worst thing in the world to leverage, because you'd rather have the money in the bank ready to go for you for another project that may show up.
Yeah.
And have it ready. You can find other alternative investments that will give you a decent yield, so that you're not just parking the money in a 0% money market fund and
Not getting
not
anything
getting in
from it.
return on it. Now you're getting a return on your money, so it's not terrible to do that. And if you arbitrage it right, you could be in an investment where you're actually making money on your money, and it's just sitting there in the bank, rather than trying to buy an investment property. I'm seeing a lot of people stretching right now, trying to buy things and do things that don't make sense, and they're not making enough money on these deals, and
So much anxiety.
No, there is.
I'm
Like,
thinking of
the
that. I
stuff
look
that's
at
going
that
on right
and
now.
I'm like, how is this person even? I'm working on one right now where they're selling a place to buy a place, and they are working with the lender to piece it together. But I mean, it is literally held together by scotch
Duct tape,
tape
yeah.
and toothpicks, not even duct tape. They're praying for duct tape at this point.
Oh my God.
It's to the point where they're trying to figure out what quarter they should close in tax wise, because
They don't have enough
the
money.
tax proration is gonna make it or break it for them, and that's someone who's going into it with bad debt. There's no good debt with that at all. They're so over leveraged, and I'm really surprised that someone hasn't turned around and said to them at this point, like,
What are you doing?
listen, what are you doing? Like, the lender, like, we can make this work, but you're really stretching it. This is not even including expenses that we're not even taking into account here, too. That's, just based on what the lender's seeing. But I mean, that's a whole nother,
Right, because that same person, right? I literally had this happen to me years ago. But a woman bought her first house. This was like right around Christmas, right around the holidays. She moved in, and a week later, boiler went. $5,000 for a
Yeah.
boiler. She didn't have the money.
Yeah.
She just spent it all trying to buy the house. Didn't have the money, and she's calling me up crying. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? I mean, I don't have.
Yeah.
I'm not doing personal loans.
Right. And some of those reserves you talk about, before we wrap up, are not just, okay, what if someone doesn't make the payment this month or doesn't make a rent payment, or, I have a hard time making the mortgage payment. That's if something like that goes. Someone comes in and someone clogs the toilet and a plumber's gonna come or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's $1,000 to get it done, and you're like, oh my God, like, am I maxing out my credit card to try and, pay the plumber for this, and then I still didn't collect rent for this month, and it's just
there's
stressful.
a lot of different aspects to it. It's leveraging a property, with a mortgage or some type of debt or financing on it isn't a terrible thing. I think a lot of people just get into that old school mindset of
Right.
I don't want to owe anybody anything, which is fine. But in this day and age, there are other alternative investments that you can put your money into that you don't need to necessarily pay cash for. You can get appropriate maybe don't, maybe instead of putting down 20%, maybe put down 50%.
Right.
And at least
Right.
you get a decent mortgage. You have a small mortgage or a decent mortgage on the property, but it's not enough where you're completely depleting your savings.
Yeah.
And then go put that in something else. And then
Right.
if you find another deal, go find another deal. So there's
I think people need to get it out of their mind that debt overall is just a bad thing. There's just good debt and bad debt, and being over leveraged is what's bad.
A mortgage isn't bad debt.
Yeah.
Having credit cards with 30% interest rates, and maxing those out to do work around your property. Listen, I've been there and done that on some of my flips
Sure.
too, so I can appreciate the why you would do that. But at the end of the day, a mortgage on a property is generally considered good debt if it's done correctly, and
Right.
just be smart about it. That's all. Just be smart about it. You don't have to leverage the whole thing. Make sure it's got good cash flow. And then just tuck it in a drawer for 10 years, and then move on and go find more, and just keep doing that. Wash, rinse, repeat, as they say. So, having good debt is not a bad thing, especially when it comes to investing and buying investment properties.
Especially when it comes to getting 19 points in your license.
No, that was bad. That car was mint though. It was like midnight blue. It was like a
Alright.
6-speed or 5-speed. Oh, it was so fun.
Wrap it up before Ryan relives his glory days.
Oh, it was
but
so good.
Until next time.
My hair glistening in the wind, cruising down
Listen,
the
you
highway.
still have all your hair, so.
Oh man,
you
it was
should
be
happy about that.
That was,
Yeah.
that was a fun car. That was definitely a fun car.
All right.
till
Till
next
next
time.
time.